of the state. She claims to have destroyed $50,000 worth of glass on her recent trip. John Isaacson, who went crazy at a religious meeting in West Superior, made a desperate attempt to escape whilst being taken by train to the Mendota Lunatic Asylum. Though bound hand and foot, he leapt off the train and gave officers from the asylum quite a tussle before finally being subdued. He imagined that he was being taken to hell.
Admitted to the Mendota Asylum for the Insane, July 3rd, 1897, town of Cleveland. German, farmer in poor circumstances, has destroyed or starved several $100s worth of cattle, claiming that witches were the cause. Believes witches and bad people are all around and keep things going wrong. Sees them every day.
Gust Seewald had long wooed Minnie Dominitz. The other day he called upon her to know if she would marry him. When she refused him, Seewald drew out a revolver and fired 3 shots at her, all of which took effect. As the girl fell to the ground, he emptied the remaining chamber into his own head. The girl cannot recover, but it was expected the murderer would live. Mrs. Frank Dutton of La Crosse has become insane, imagining that she is Jesus Christ.
Admitted to the Mendota Asylum for the Insane, May 9th, 1899. Religious.
Cut off the heads of all his chickens.
Witches. Says she got lost.
Split William Taylor's head open with hanged himself to a
Neighbors
tree.
threatened to lynch him.
On the subject of religion,
Mysterious circumstances.
disposed to injure others.
Adultery of witchcraft.
Witches.
Is Jesus Christ.
Arrested at the cross in the act of firing a barn on the north side.
And the destruction of thousands of property. She has the power of saving people.
Mrs. John Lawson, wife of a farmer living near the town of St. Croix, drowned her 3 children during a fit of insanity. Her husband, on finding her absent from the house, began a search and found her at the lake shore with one of her children lying in the sand, dead. The other 2 are presumed to be in the lake. Mrs. Lawson imagines that devils pursue her.
the devil, and all his empty promises. If you take our Lord Jesus quite literally in your physical being in this most treasured of gifts, Christ is present in, with, and under the bread and the wine. Bread and wine taken into our physical selves, transformed in the biological processes into bodily tissue and cells and blood.
This is the blood of Christ, shed for you, the blood of Christ.
There was this man in Plainfield, Wisconsin, Ed Gein. This is no lie. You know, did you ever hear about him? You heard of Jeffrey Dahmer? I can remember Ed Schley was our at that time, he was the garbage man, but he was sheriff during the time when Ed was taken and he shot this Mary Wortman, and then he took her in his barn and he dressed her out like a deer. And I was in the house of Darlene Hill.
There were two log cutters out doing their job, and they called and reported that they had found what they believed to be a human head. We responded, got to the scene, and indeed, in a black plastic garbage bag was a human head. And that human head had been somewhat decomposed, but was still quite intact. And in the bag also, it was found human hair and an earring.
Bar fights on the weekends, drunk drivers, domestic fights. Nothing real serious that goes on here in the community. It's a pretty good community to work with.
We had one child who was murdered, and that was a very extremely difficult funeral for the entire community. It was a brutal murder.
One fine October afternoon, a woman arrived at the depot claiming to be the world-renowned opera singer Pauline Lallemande. She certainly arrived here in some style, wearing a stage costume and accompanied by Edgar, her son from a liaison with a French nobleman. At some point, her artistic career had faltered, and she had spent the last of her money acquiring a few acres of land 7 miles to the east of town, on the understanding that it was to be found amongst the foothills of a mountain resort. The full facts of this curious tale were never published in the newspaper, but no history of the town would be complete without it. Mrs. Lallemande and Edgar were too proud to show their disappointment with their new surroundings, and set about creating an illusion of their own. They presented a series of musical soirees in a vain attempt to find patrons amongst the rich and more cultured families in town. It was said that her voice was indeed powerful, though a little compromised by her ill-fitting false teeth that rattled constantly as she sang. At these events, Mrs. Lallemande referred to sinister forces at work in the region, which led to questions about her fragile state of mind. Meanwhile, the shabbiness of her dress and circumstances raised suspicions that this woman could not be who she claimed to be. The first business failure in Jackson County, resulting from the worst financial crash and commercial depression the country has ever known, was announced on Monday night, when the Honorable H.H. Price assigned all his property to attorney B.J. Castle for the benefit of his creditors. One of the sad results of the financial embarrassment of Mr. H.H. Price was the business failure of W.C. Jones, which it precipitated. He had the largest grocery store in town and was really one of our most successful businessmen. An attempt was made to assassinate W. Seymour, the treasurer of the Seymour Bank, which collapsed last week. 2 shots were fired at him from a saloon,